classes are usually defined as classes with more than 30 students. Large classes can be both challenging and rewarding. They're rewarding because there's a lot of energy going on and the dynamics can be very exciting. They're challenging, however, from a classroom management perspective. How do you keep so many students on task, and how do you meet the learning needs of so many students? In this session, we'll take a look at both strategies and activity adaptations to help you manage your large classes effectively. We'll start the session by taking a general look at the overall challenges presented by large classes, and we'll categorize these into three main categories. We'll then take a look at each of these three categories in turn. The first is general classroom management. The second is assessment, so how do we determine where students are at with their learning? And the final one is how do we meet individual student learning needs? So let's take a look at managing large classes. As I said in the introduction, large classes are defined as those with more than 30 students. Large classes are the reality in many parts of the world. So as teachers, we need to be able to manage this number of students. Managing large classes or teaching large classes can actually be really fun. There's a lot of energy going on. You've got a lot of different personalities and backgrounds to work with, and you can get a lot of different types of student interaction going. On the other hand, teaching large classes can be very challenging. We can divide these challenges into three main categories. The first category is classroom management. How do we make the teaching and learning process unfold in a controlled and productive way when we're dealing with so many students? The second category is assessment. What tools can we use to assess our students so that our assessment is valid and reliable, but also practical? And finally, the third category is learning needs. How do we meet the individual learning needs of each one of these students in our large classes? We'll take a look at each of these categories in more detail in turn. When it comes to classroom management for large classes, there are four areas that we want to focus on. The first one is ensuring that our students behave appropriately and respectfully to each other, so to the other students, and also to us as teachers. The second area is ensuring that the noise level in our classes doesn't get too high. Other teachers around us certainly won't appreciate it if our noise level gets out of control. The third area is ensuring that our activities unfold smoothly and efficiently. And the fourth area is ensuring that our activities are logistically doable, or that our interaction patterns are logistically doable with a large class and with the classroom space that we have to work with. So let's take a look at each of these four areas. Here are some strategies to ensure that your students behave appropriately and respectfully to each other. No one, be they a student or a teacher, wants to be in a classroom where people are not behaving appropriately and not behaving respectfully. That's just no fun for anyone. So here are some strategies to look at. As a class, decide upon a set of rules that everyone in the class is going to follow. Make sure all of the students know these rules and understand them. Take the set of rules and put them on paper or poster paper and post them in your classroom so that everyone can see them and everyone can be reminded about these rules. Make sure that you as the teacher enforce these rules fairly and equally with all students. A key to enforcing these rules fairly is to use positive reinforcement. So encourage students when they behave appropriately. And finally, make sure that you establish a clear and predictable classroom routine. So have routines for taking attendance, taking up homework, distributing papers, and collecting papers. When students have a routine to follow and they know what's going to happen, they can become very relaxed and very comfortable in the learning environment. And when they're relaxed and comfortable, they tend to behave appropriately and respectfully. When you have a lot of students communicating in English at the same time, you can't help but generate a lot of noise in your classroom. And as I said, teachers in surrounding classrooms might not appreciate having a lot of noise coming through the walls or coming down the hallway. So we do have to be careful about the noise level that our large classes generate. One strategy for kind of controlling the noise level in your class when students are doing communicative activities is to have a noise chart. A noise chart simply indicates different levels of voices that students should use for different activities. So they can have a loud voice, a conversational voice, a whisper voice, and no voice. At the beginning of each activity, tell students which voice they should use for this particular activity. Introduce the noise chart at the beginning of the course and make sure all of the students are familiar with how it works. Another strategy is to have a signal to give the class when the noise level is getting too high. So you can have a signal like keep the noise level down or something like that to tell the students we need to take the noise level down a little bit. Another challenge with classroom management is activity management. So you want to ensure that your activities unfold efficiently and effectively throughout the class. So there are some strategies you can use with large classes to ensure that this happens. So let's take a look at some of these. The first strategy is to post your objectives on the board at the beginning of the class. So just clearly spell out, here are the things that we're going to do in the class. This way students know what's coming and the class is very predictable. And if they get lost and they can't remember what they're supposed to be doing, they can look up at the objectives on the board. Always have your lessons well planned. Know exactly what you're going to be doing and at which point in the lesson you're going to be doing it. Don't leave anything to chance with large classes. When you leave things to chance, you just invite chaos in the door. Along with having your lessons well planned, make sure that you have all of your materials prepared beforehand. So have your photocopies made, have your markers and your pens and your pencils ready, and any other materials, have them out. You can't leave a large class to go off to the teacher's room to photocopy. That's, once again, inviting chaos in the door. Another activity management strategy is to make sure that your instructions for that activity are simple and clear. Reinforce your instructions that you give verbally with written instructions that you put on the board, and also model the activity whenever possible. So give students an example to follow. And finally, do a comprehension check. Make sure that students have understood exactly what they are supposed to do. With large classes, it's really important to make sure that all of the students can actually see you when you're giving instructions and when you're modeling your activities. So make sure you're visible at whatever position in the classroom you're at by all of the students in the class. Along with that, also make sure that all of the students can hear you. If you have to use a microphone, if your class is that big, then use a microphone. A final activity management strategy is to have some kind of signal that you give to the class to indicate that the activity is over. This signal can be some kind of gesture like time out or time, or you can flick the lights on and off, or you can clap your hands. Just establish a signal at the beginning of the course, and when students hear or see the signal, they know the activity is over. Just as important as activity management is your activity planning. And a key part of this activity planning is strategically selecting student interaction patterns that allow maximum student participation, but also maximum control for you as the teacher with this large number of students. So we'll take a look at some different student interaction patterns that you can use with your activities so that you can meet both of these goals. The first student interaction pattern that's really good with large classes is choral drilling. Choral drilling is simply all of the students in the class saying exactly the same thing at the same time. And they're usually repeating something that you as the teacher have said. Choral drilling kind of went out of fashion with communicative language teaching, but it's coming back in because it does have its place in your teaching repertoire. Choral drilling is really good for students to start producing language without having the stress of performing individually. And they don't have to be creative with the language. They simply have to imitate what you said as the teacher. Choral drilling is also good to get students automatically using set phrases in English. And students have to learn these set phrases to communicate effectively in English. So put choral drilling into your repertoire when you're working with large classes. Another student interaction pattern that works with a whole class at the same time is a show of hands. So as the teacher, you say a statement or ask a question, and students put their hands up if they agree with the statement or if they answer yes to the particular question that you've asked. A show of hands is a really good way, once again, for you to know if students have understood what you've said. If they put their hand up appropriately, you know they've understood. If they don't put their hand up appropriately, they probably haven't understood. Technology has presented us with some other options that are the equivalent to a show of hands. You may have seen what are called clickers. These are little devices that kind of look like remote controls, and students click one of 2 buttons or one of 3 buttons in order to answer a question that you've posed as a teacher. The student responses are then automatically collected and then displayed up on the screen. You'll know immediately what students know about that particular language point that you've taught. A less expensive clicker type option is using technology that allows students to make their iPhones or their smartphones into clickers. So there's free software available that students download and you also download. You then input questions into the Quizmaker section of the software, and students click whatever answers using their cell phones or their smartphones, and once again the answers are collated and put up on the screen. So these are show of hand type activities that use different types of technology. Another interaction pattern that works really well with large classes is called team reporting. This is a small group interaction pattern rather than a whole class pattern. In team reporting, students are divided into small groups, so 4 or 5 students per group. And each group is given a set of cards. So they get an A card, a B card, a C card, and a D card. You then ask the whole class multiple choice questions. As a team, students decide which answer is correct, A, B, C, or D, and then they hold up the card with the answer they've chosen. You'll know immediately whether each group has understood the question based upon the response that they hold up. You can do a similar type activity just with check mark and X's, so groups get 2 cards and not 4 cards. You then say a sentence, and if students think the sentence is correct, they hold up the check mark card. If they think it's incorrect, they hold up the X card. So this is team reporting. The next interaction pattern that works well with large classes is called think, pair, and share. Think, pair, share makes use of individual work, pair work, and then whole class or small group work. So there's actually multiple interaction patterns happening here. So you as the teacher give students something, a statement or a question. Students first individually think about that question and come up with their own personal answer. Students then get into pairs and share their answers with their partners. Then students either get into small groups or work as a whole class to discuss their answers that way. Think, pair, share is really good, particularly for your shyer students. It allows your shyer students to first work individually and then in a pair, which tends to be safer, and then your less shy students can take part in the overall group sharing. So try think, pair, and share. The final interaction pattern that's effective with large classes is student teams. So students are working in groups of 4 or 5 students. And within that group or that team, students are given different roles. So there is a student whose job it is to monitor their discussion to make sure that all of the students are participating. So they're called, obviously, the monitor. The next role is that of secretary. So the secretary has the job of writing down all of the answers that the group comes up with. And the final role to make sure you assign is the spokesperson role. So this is the person who's responsible for reporting the group's answers to the whole class. Assessment with large classes can be very challenging simply because of the large number of students that you have to assess at the same time. Remember that assessments need to be valid, so you have to test what you intend to test. They have to be reliable so that whoever marks them is going to come up with the same mark. and they have to be practical so they don't take too much time and effort to administer and to mark. When it comes to large classes, it's very difficult to balance validity, reliability, and practicality. Assessments that are very valid, for example, an individual student interview to assess speaking, are not very practical when it comes to large classes. It just takes too much time. Assessments that are very reliable and practical, such as multiple choice questions or fill-in-the-blank questions, are not that valid, particularly with the productive skills. So finding this validity, reliability, and practicality balance with large classes is your challenge. Here are some assessment strategies for large classes. The first one is good for speaking and particularly for writing assessments. Have students complete a self-evaluation or a self-assessment using a rubric or a checklist that you've provided. Not only does this save you a little bit of time, but it does force the students to analyze their own language production, and that makes them independent as learners and also self-aware as learners. Similar to self-assessment, have students do peer assessment. So students are assessing or evaluating a partner. This is also good for speaking and for writing. Peer assessment, like self-assessment, creates independent learners and self-aware learners. Students learn a lot about what good language is simply by having to assess their peers. For speaking assessments, have students record their answers using software available on the internet or software from a computer lab. This makes the speaking assessments much more efficient. You don't have to spend time scheduling students and finding classroom space and so on. Students submit their recorded answers to you, and then you can listen to them outside of class time. Another assessment strategy is to use a learning management system. This is not a strategy about selecting different types of assessments, but it's a strategy that helps make the submission and return of assessments very efficient. So students can submit their speaking recordings and their written work to you via the learning management system. You can also put learning quizzes into the system that students complete online. So a learning management system allows you to make that assessment process as efficient as possible. There is another challenge when it comes to assessing students in large classes, and that is the challenge of academic honesty. It's very difficult with a lot of students taking the same assessment at the same point in time to ensure that they are not looking at each other's answers, that they don't have their answers scribbled on a post-it note somewhere, or whatever other cheating strategy they might choose to use. So you have to have in place a strategy, and this is going to vary from teacher to teacher, to ensure that students are accurately demonstrating their own academic ability and not someone else's. Large classes, simply by statistical probability, are going to have a lot of different language proficiency levels within the one class. You've simply got more students, so there's more probability of having a wider range of student abilities. And this is even true if classes are constructed based on student language ability. So large classes are usually multi-level classes. You've got a lot of students at a lot of different language proficiency levels. So you have to figure out a way to somehow meet the learning needs of those students regardless of what level they're at. You have to meet the needs of your lower level students, your mid-level students, and your high-level students. Here are some strategies to use to ensure that you meet individual student learning needs as much as possible in these multi-level large classes. The first strategy is to use a diagnostic test at the very beginning of your course. This will allow you to know exactly where each student is right from the beginning. This information can inform your activity decisions, your curriculum planning, and also your activity groupings. So know right from the beginning where each student is at. Another strategy for multi-level large classes is to strategically group students for different activities based on language proficiency. So sometimes you'll group students with all similar language proficiency levels, and sometimes you'll group students with mixed language proficiency levels. And mix it up, so do some activities with one type of grouping and some activities with the other type of grouping. For key activities, have different stages to the same activity. For your higher level students, require that they complete all of the stages in the activity. For your lower level students, just require 1 or 2 stages in the activity. So you're demanding more from your higher level students, but everyone's performing the same general task. Here's another strategy. Have a list of additional activities or additional tasks that your higher level students can do once they've finished the main activity that all of the other students are doing. So high level students finish an activity, they look at the task list or the activity list, and they pick something to do, and then they complete that while the other students are finishing the main activity. As another strategy, enlist your higher proficiency students to serve as in-class tutors for your lower students. So while most of the students in the class are completing an activity individually, these high-low combinations are doing pair work with the higher level student helping the lower level student. Another strategy with multi-level classes is to train students to be independent learners. So teach them to track their own progress so they know where they're at, teach them to self-correct, and teach them to stay on task and be organized. If you use a learning management system with your class, use that system to make activities available to your higher level students and your lower level students. So activities for your higher level students that they can complete independently will take them beyond what you've done in class. So these are extension activities. Activities for your lower level students will be scaffolding activities that will help these students kind of backfill things that they might have missed during class time. Finally, make sure that your activities meet the learning needs of all of the different learning styles. So for example, make sure your activities meet the needs of visual learners, auditory learners, tactile learners, and kinesthetic learners. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes lower proficiency students simply struggle because the activities are not a good match for their particular learning styles. So if you hit all of the learning styles, maybe you'll help some of these lower students improve their language proficiency. Teaching large classes is challenging. That's just the reality. But we don't have to let that challenge overwhelm us. When we use the strategies we've talked about in this session, we can give our language students the best language learning experience possible, even if they are a part of a large class.